A cold cave in the Liguria region of Italy, about 10,000 years ago. On the ground, people placed a baby who had only lived for just over a month. Not in a hurry, not carelessly. Around the baby's body were dozens of shell beads that had been pierced and worn down because they had been worn for a long time before. 3 pendants lay right at the shoulders and upper chest, as if they had been sewn onto a small blanket wrapped around the baby's body. We often think prehistoric people were too busy surviving to pity a newborn baby. But someone here put in a lot of effort just to say one thing: this baby had immense meaning. That is the first shock. The second shock is even bigger. Prehistory did not only have mothers giving birth and raising children by themselves in the forest and then standing up to keep going as if nothing happened. Evidence from ancient pelvises, child burials, feeding tools, milk-bearing pottery jugs, and even child-rearing models in modern hunter-gatherer societies all show the exact opposite. Giving birth in humans has been a difficult problem from very early on, and raising a child is even less of a task that one person could do alone. So if there were no hospitals, no formula milk, no strollers, no antibiotics, then how did a pregnancy unfold? How did the birthing process happen? And after the baby was born, who was the one to hold, breastfeed, spoon-feed, soothe to sleep, and keep the child alive? To understand that, we must go back very far, not only in terms of history, but regarding the very body of the human species. But wait. Before moving on, if you like topics that turn a seemingly ordinary question into a story that is both scientific and fascinating, take a second to hit the like button and subscribe to the Why So channel. This is completely free and will help the video reach many curious people just like you. Let us get back to our bodies. Humans have a difficult time giving birth not because nature was sloppy, but because our bodies are the result of many overlapping compromises. Walking upright on 2 legs forced the pelvis to change to meet specific mechanical demands. Meanwhile, human fetuses have much larger heads and brains compared to other primate species. The result is that human childbirth is placed in an incredibly stressful boundary. The pelvis cannot expand infinitely, and the baby's head is not small at all. Recent studies emphasize that this is a complex trade-off system, rather than an easy one-sided story. But do not think this process was the same from the beginning to the end of evolutionary history. In the southern ape species Australopithecus sediba, living about 1.98 million years ago, the pelvic structure shows that the fetus entered the pelvic inlet in a transverse direction, but perhaps did not yet need a complex series of rotational steps like in modern humans. In other words, the human-style birthing mechanism today is something that was gradually assembled over time and did not appear completely right from the start. Pregnancy alone consumes a massive amount of energy. Then, when it is time to give birth, the risks skyrocket. After that comes an even more dangerous phase in a more silent way. That is raising an extremely immature creature, needing a lot of breastfeeding, needing a lot of cuddling, prone to infection, and taking a very long time to be able to care for itself. Precisely because human children are helpless for so long, our survival strategy is not just about giving birth, but giving birth and then together keeping the child alive through the early years of life. Studies emphasize that in humans, the care network often extends to fathers, grandmothers, older siblings, and other relatives. The investment of secondary caregivers is not a bizarre exception, but a core part of the human child-rearing system. This chain of causes unfolds very logically. A larger fetal head creates pressure on the birthing process. A relatively immature newborn prolongs dependence after birth. A long breastfeeding period makes the mother bear an extremely large energy cost. When the community invented or took advantage of supplemental foods like soft porridge, animal milk, or feeding tools, they could somewhat loosen that pressure. But as soon as that door of survival opened, other risks flooded in, such as bacterial infections, parasites, unhygienic food, and biological stresses surrounding weaning. And so, the history of human pregnancy and child-rearing became a sequence of trade-offs that was not smooth at all. We have clear evidence for this chain of trade-offs. The first piece of evidence is the ancient pelvis, as mentioned with the southern ape species, showing that the evolution of childbirth is a process of constant transformation. The second piece of evidence is ancient DNA and biological markers in teeth. In the Krems-Wartburg region of Austria, people found the oldest known identical twins living in the Paleolithic period. Tooth histology and isotope analysis showed that one baby passed away right at birth, while the other lived for about 50 days. The community at that time buried these 2 lives with extremely solemn rituals, using vermilion red powder, ivory beads, and mammoth bones. They absolutely did not consider these premature, ill-fated children to be meaningless. The third piece of evidence is precisely the child burials. The case of the 40 to 50-day-old baby girl in Italy is a powerful testament. Up to 66 shell beads and 3 pendants were buried along with her. Someone had to go find the shells. Someone had to drill the holes. Someone had to string, sew, and cherish them. In other words, archaeology does not just see objects, but also sees the time and family affection frozen within those items. The fourth piece of evidence is ancient feeding tools. In Serbia, 3 bone spoons were analyzed for wear marks. Scientists compared 2,230 marks on the spoons with 3,151 experimental baby teeth marks and concluded that these spoons were once used to feed children. In Bavaria, 3 small ceramic jugs with spouts in Bronze Age child graves contained milk residue from ruminant animals. Food other than breast milk is not a modern invention. It has a very deep history. The fifth piece of evidence comes from isotope analyses reconstructing the weaning process. Research in China during the Eastern Zhou period showed that children at that time completed weaning at around 2.5 to 4 years of age. Breastfeeding duration is not exactly the same everywhere. It changes flexibly according to the environment, culture, and social structure. The sixth piece of evidence is the studies on cooperative childcare. In traditional hunter-gatherer societies like the Hadza people, the mother on average only takes on about 57% of direct care, while the remaining 43% comes from other people in the group. With the Ba Yaka people, data from 140 foraging trips showed that girls from 4 to 7 years old themselves helped increase foraging productivity for nursing mothers. The prehistoric child was raised by an entire village. And finally, the seventh piece of evidence is the traces of biological stress. In Brazil, research on the remains of 41 prehistoric people showed that illness and stress surrounding the weaning period were directly linked to early mortality rates. Almost every improvement in child-rearing comes with a price to pay. But here is the strange and groundbreaking part. The things that helped babies survive more, like a more supportive community, more flexible supplemental foods, more accessible animal milk, actually created population changes much larger than the scale of a single family. Simply put, when a mother does not have to exclusively breastfeed for too long, her reproductive cycle can return earlier. That is directly related to birth rates, population booms, and ultimately how human society expanded. But at the same time, introducing food other than breast milk too early or in poor hygienic conditions also increased the risk of disease. The thing that saves a child in this scenario could put another child in danger in a different scenario. From the story of one mother, we see the story of all humanity. If human children need collective care for that long, then raising children is not just a biological process, but it also shapes social structures. It pulls the grandmother into the story, pulls older siblings into the story, pulls even immature children into the story. It also forces the community to decide a very human thing. How small does a baby have to be considered a person important enough to be mourned, decorated, and remembered forever? Ancient graves show that, at least in some prehistoric societies, the answer is very early, incredibly early. So what was pregnancy and child rearing in prehistory really like? Very difficult, extremely dangerous, prolonged, and rarely the job of a single individual. Pregnancy is a test of the body. Childbirth is a test of anatomical structure. And keeping a child alive through the early years is a test of an entire community. Prehistoric children were often breastfed for a long time, but it was not always just breast milk. They were fed solid food with soft porridge, animal milk, or semi-liquid food, depending on the era. In short, prehistoric infants were not raised purely by instinct. They were raised by an entire social network. And so we return to the cave in Liguria. A baby passed away at just over a month old. But what remains after 10,000 years is not just pieces of dry bone. It is evidence showing that someone held the baby, wrapped the baby, decorated the baby, and placed the baby down on the ground very carefully. Prehistory often appears in our minds as stone, bone, and a soulless silence. But sometimes, right amidst that cold dirt, we encounter a very modern emotion, which is the fear of losing a child. Perhaps what makes this story most memorable is that it shakes a familiar illusion that parenting today is artificial, while in the past, it was natural. In fact, long before there were hospitals and plastic baby bottles, humans have always had to invent, adapt, manage, and rely on each other to bring children through the fragile early years of life. The things we thought were fixed, like pregnancy, childbirth, motherhood, fatherhood, might very well just be the latest version of a story that has been constantly changing for hundreds of thousands of years. Thank you for watching, goodbye, and see you next time.